So if you know basically anything about me or my relationship with Hunter x Hunter, then you would know that the Phantom Troupe are my complete favorite straight-up antagonist group in fiction. Not just anime and manga, in fiction in general. For how they are cohesively, there are some amazing individual members whom I love, but just as a collective, they do so many poetic things thematically and spiritually, and it coalesces in these amazing moments and such amazing character work. But the nature of their design, and part of the reason I like them so much, is because Togashi explores them using breadcrumbs and abstract bits of information and lots of efficiency so that you need to put little bits together using things that are not concrete, details that are not spoon-fed to you to understand exactly what they're all about, and that goes for Chrollo even double, because you think of Chrollo, the Phantom Troupe, the spider as a whole, are part of his characterization and baked into it, and the members and their place in it and how it works into their motivations, but how they provide fuel for the entity, it's all amazing, and it's one of my favorite things about Hunter x Hunter. But like I alluded to grasp what they're all about, you've often had to, glean out little details and abstract pieces of information to then get interpretations from and try to put the full picture together using these little bits of puzzle pieces. And Togashi has, with chapter 395, completely blown that approach out of the water with going into a full backstory for the Phantom Troupe. This chapter has been the first part of what I assume will be a multi-part exploration of their past and why a lot of them became the way they became, and why they do what they do, and why Chrollo does what he does, and so many details that could have long-reaching implications with regards to so many things about the plot. Kurapika's backstory, if it goes further, other details, but we'll get into that. My point is, it is a shock. It feels surreal that Togashi is doing this sort of approach with these characters. Not because it wasn't ever something that entered my mind as a possibility, but just this is far beyond anything I was expecting at this point in the story. And so much is said to us here, and because we have been fed on a lean diet of minuscule abstract details for putting things together for the Phantom Troupe, now we have so many things to look at to add to our perceptions of them. And so it's like you're ravenous and someone just drops, a 10-course serving in front of you. Where do you start? What do you get out of it? It's beautiful, and I love this, and I can't wait for more. But first, we gotta dive into this chapter, which was one of my favorite of the Succession War. Funnily enough, I've been putting together a video ranking Hunter x Hunter's arcs, and I'm not going to give it away, but the place I put the Succession War in, it's not going to be there much longer. It is going up, and that's why I have to release that video sooner than I actually wanted to, because the rankings there are going to change if it continues on this trajectory. There are so many magnificent characters and themes and plot details and intricacies dwelt upon in this arc, but with specifics to this chapter, Hisoka and Chrollo stocks are big on the rise, even other Phantom Troupe members as well. But the plot does progress. It isn't just a pure backstory that doesn't dwell on the current happenings, because we start with Hinrig, who realizes that the High Lee members are actually, through looking through his cat cam, he realizes that the High Lee members are actually disappearing after going to the general public area. Wang then collaborates with the Phantom Troupe and the Spider and gets them to investigate a very specific room, telling them that there could be a trap there, but they don't give a shit. They go anyway. They try to investigate this room, and the guy inside tells them to go away, and Phaeton just sticks his knife in there. This really cool, very narrow panel as we see him just threatening this guy. Really awesome. And they make their way in. Nobunaga then cuts a square into the toilet where they imagine this is a secret entrance to somewhere. And they walk out into what looks like some sort of alleyway with lots of discarded, it's pretty empty, but there are still lots of bits of discarded clothes and food, and it's clear that people have been inhabiting this place. And Phaeton says, people were here recently and they just ran away. They theorize that Luini could have been some sort of scapegoat from which the outcome of his fate, they would decide how to proceed accordingly, using what happens to him as a sort of guideline. And so, after seeing what happened to him, they probably just scarpered. And Nobunaga hypothesizes this and looks at the effect that Luini's death had on them and says, they're kind of like us, in that the death of a member of their group causes this huge knock-on effect and causes a big impact. Not necessarily emotionally in the way that Uvo's death did or Pakunoda's death did, because they clearly didn't care about him that way, but it causes them to change their whole strategy. So just from the perspective of a overall general impact, it has a big one, just like it does in the Phantom Troop, if you don't look into the specifics. Now, Finks takes exception to that, and he says, no, these guys, we don't let rookies into our group, which they do, which is true. Because the Phantom Troop, they only let someone into their group if they defeat someone who was a member, if they kill them. Like Hisoka was able to enter, and like that, their policy, because they want to overall strengthen the spider, so it will then become stronger and perpetuate itself even more as they continue to express themselves in this world and continue to live through it. So naturally you want it to become stronger. So this meritocratic system, it contributes to that. So yeah, they don't let rookies in. Next, he also says, we don't want to destroy the world. And that's something we talked about in a couple chapters ago, where obviously they don't want the world to be destroyed because a world's being gone means that they have no way to live within it. They want to express themselves in the world. They don't want to destroy it all. They don't want to raze it to the ground. So naturally, the Phantom Troop want the world to stay alive, to persist. Whereas they look at people who do want to destroy it and they look at them as immature, or that just they can't jive with that. So Fink says, yeah, like if you look at these two details, they're not like us at all. And Nobunaga says, really? We used to want to destroy the world in the beginning, when we were fueled by despair and anger. We were searching for a purpose through this. And this is the cue for the flashback to start. But even just that line in itself, before they matured into what they are now and weren't just mindlessly destroying everything, they were searching for a purpose fueled by anger and despair. So this immediately makes you think, what caused this anger and despair? Could it just have been growing up in Meteor City and looking at the world as unfair? Potentially, because of course that's justifiable ambitions or motivations for anyone who grows up in Meteor City. It's a horrible place. But as we would soon see, no. The Phantom Troop, as kids living here, did not really want for a purpose. They all seemed to be living okay lives, doing the best they could with what they had. They were not forlorn. They were not looking at their circumstances and wishing for more. At least not through what we see with this chapter. So something very likely happened. But nonetheless, I'm getting ahead of myself. We get into this huge spread of Meteor City. And in that spread, we see this tape. And I disproportionately freaked out when I saw this tape because there's been so many theories about what this could have on it. Could this have to do with Chapter Black from Yu Yu Hakusho? Could there be some integration of series there? Could it have something to do with the darkness of humanity? People have theorized about this for, I guess, decades. And I don't tend to be much of a theorizer with things like that, but it's always piqued my interest and I've always wondered as well. And so seeing this was huge because it's also kind of a symbol of their upbringing and their roots in Meteor City. And I could never forget one of the most unforgettable sequences in the whole story, anime and manga. This beautifully dark and foreboding scene, I'm thinking of the anime now, where Child Chrollo, there's the tape being tossed around between them, and he has it, and he just, at the top of this heap of garbage, embraces the open sky and horizon, in a bit of a parallel to how he conducts on top of the buildings in York New. But the tape sticks out there and makes you wonder, what is the deal with that? Is it just garbage? Does it mean something more, like what I said before? Either way, it's huge, and so seeing it here made me freak the hell out, because we're now getting background information for the troop, and this potential tape, and what it could have meant. It's crazy. So then we just see all these baby members of the troop. Uvo, bless his heart, is a sort of rough and tough delinquent type within this territory where he says, I'm the king of this hill, no one can come and grab anything that I have here, all my belongings are my belongings. Him and Machi looks adorable here, are kind of defending his hill, and what happens is that Chrollo, Shalnark, and Franklin have stolen this tape from his hill, from his kingdom, as he calls it, and they run away with it. They kind of fight, and they run away with it. Interestingly enough, we see bits of their characterization that ended up being consistent, at least for someone like Uvo, for someone like Franklin, who I would say is the second in command in terms of embodying the Phantom Troop philosophy in the present, and he continues to do it here. He says, this tape is for everyone, go on, Chrollo, and he kind of acts like a second in command, even at this young age, however long ago it was, 20 years, whatever. So Chrollo escapes with this tape, and he's confronted by Finks and Phaeton. Finks, who looks interesting face he's got there, interesting hairdo. Let's just say he had a bit of a glow up. And Phaeton, not really talking much, but he looks quite a bit different as well. And Finks is clearly not super antagonistic, not like vehemently horribly villainous here to Chrollo, but it seems like there's the potential of him being a sort of bully. He could have been quite a bad guy in that way. So I'm not saying he was evil at this point. Well, we're talking about the Phantom Troop, but you know what I mean. But he definitely seemed to be antagonistic towards Chrollo, and he definitely seemed to be a sort of bully character. So he demands the tape from Chrollo, and Chrollo gives it to him, but he then just does a switcheroo, so he gave him a different tape, and the one he wanted was in his pocket or something, and he thinks rides away, and Chrollo just kind of looks at it and kind of treasures and embraces it. Very interesting, because the Chrollo we know now, he has no identity, no purpose, he doesn't ascribe value to anything except for his troop. But here he's treasuring something very deeply. Notably, the contrast here for Chrollo is so stark, to put it lightly. He is a carefree kid. He is so different. He's joyous, exuberant, very enthusiastic. But like I said, the current Chrollo has no identity. He has no excitement in life for things in general. This one is so full of life. And while, a kid, a young kid, may not necessarily have their identity completely figured out, we gain an identity as we experience things and learn what we value in life. And it's a sort of process where you add more and more and more to yourself until you realize, this is who I am, this is what I value, this is what I want out of life. And so I don't think kids necessarily usually have that distinct sense of identity just yet. Not when they're 6, 7, 8, or however old they seem to be. Whereas people who are a bit older, 12, 13, 14, Gon, Killua, for example, throughout the series, do eventually gain a sense of identity. Gon had it from the start, Killua had to grow into it, but I think there's a discrepancy between that and this. But nonetheless, I digress. The point is, Chrollo was on the trajectory to finding himself as a kid. He was just a regular kid here. He valued things. He tried to learn languages, as it said to us. He was interested in TV programs. He loved people, as we'll get into. He had attachments to all sorts of things, and as such, he had all the means to develop purpose and an identity. What the hell happened to him? Some sort of event clearly happened to Chrollo to cause him to become what he became, and so that is such a hook for this. Does that coalesce with the anger and despair that Nobunaga talked about? We were fueled by anger and despair, searching for a purpose. Interesting. Also, interesting detail as well is that Nobunaga is the character who triggered this flashback through his words, but we don't see him in this chapter yet, so I wonder when he'll come in. Anyways, Chrollo takes the tape back to the church, and it's revealed that he's been learning the languages, like I mentioned, trying to get all sorts of means to just become more knowledgeable and learn it and learn more about the world. And that's a really interesting detail which we'll put a pin in and get back to a bit later. It's also mentioned as Chrollo talks to Rizal, I believe his name was, Rizal, that kids throughout Meteor City have been getting abducted on the outskirts of the city. It's become a very dangerous spot. It's been raided by people. Meteor City being this area where people are just, they have no identity, they have nowhere they belong to, they have no purpose, really. This has made them prime targets for nefarious individuals who capture people, capture kids, the majority of which are below the age of 15, for nefarious reasons. So now we know that this is a huge part of why Meteor City made a deal with the mob to provide them with recruits and people who could bolster their ranks in exchange for protection. Very understandable seeing what's going on here. This was told to us in York New, all the way back in the middle of York New, that there are agreements in place between Meteor City and the Mafia. Eventually, the elders of Meteor City, after making this deal, started developing Nen powers, and it's not stated here, but maybe potentially passed them on to their young ones, the members of the Spider, potentially taught them this, and the law of retribution was established. Only life can pay for life. We will accept anything, but don't take anything away from us. We've heard this before. In response to the Corta massacre, which we'll get into in a bit as well. And then it's also stated here that the Spiders were just learning to crawl when Meteor City became this city of the fearful to this city of the feared. So they got caught up right at the proper moment, the proper time of this wave where Meteor City was gaining stature and power. And we can put two and two together and understand why, at least in broad terms, a lot of them became this strong. They kind of got swept up in it, potentially. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but that is enough for us to infer that happening. So we'll see if Togashi expands on that. Either way, really interesting details and lots of really cool potential future developments to be fleshed out in background information that we'll get later on. If you can't tell, I'm really excited for basically anything else for this backstory that Togashi has cooking. But then, in what is the emotional fulcrum, I think, of the chapter, Chrollo finds Pakunoda at the church when he's about to watch the tape. There are these adorable interactions between the two. They are so cute, they clearly are close, and they just know each other really well and have this very strong bond, potentially the strongest out of the current Spider members at that point in time. And I love that it is essentially the heart, the core of the chapter, because in this city of desolation and no purpose and blood and death and rot and stagnation, these two have this beautiful relationship. It's clear just through the tiny details we get, and, well, I'll talk about that in a second. We then cut to the elders, who talk about Chrollo in glowing terms. They say that he has great potential, clearly alluding, I think, to his ability to continue to learn more about the world, his ability to learn languages and become more knowledgeable, and just his overall aptitude as a person. He's an impressive kid, maybe a little bit of a prodigy. And they say that they have hope going forward for him to resolve the problems of Meteor City. And you think to yourself, why? How? How do they want to use him? Are they going to coerce him, manipulate him? What's going on here? Blackmail, bribe? I don't know. But that seems very important for what's going to happen later to Chrollo. Some sort of inciting event, maybe coalescing with their use for him? I don't know. But it's interesting because there's a bit of a parallel between Chrollo and Kurapika here. Both were looked at to be kind of chosen ones of their respective clans or respective villages or respective cities and upbringings. Kurapika was seen to be a little bit of a prodigy as well himself. More knowledgeable, more learned, more experienced and mature than most of the people around them, and the same sort of energy and enthusiastic spirit and desire to know more about the world for both of them. Kurapika and Chrollo have really interesting inverse parallel dynamics in a lot of ways, with their relationship with others and their search for identity and how they drift towards or from certain things in life. Not going to get into a ton of that here, but they have a really cool dynamic, one of the coolest in the series. And I think learning about Chrollo's upbringing here and how it coalesces with Kurapika's adds to it even more. And both clearly have huge connections with the people around them. Chrollo loving Pakunoda and having connections with the people around him, and Kurapika with Pyro and his clan, so a bit of a common link there too. So notably, the tape that Chrollo procured from Uvo and his kingdom was skipped over for the first 10 minutes, which could be significant. Who knows, maybe that'll be dwelt on later about what was erased there. Either way, they end up turning to a TV program that's called the Cleanup Rangers, superheroes of sorts. And they are wide-eyed and their jaws are dropping, Paku and Chrollo, as they watch this. It's adorable. And it's in another language, so Chrollo wants to dub over it so that everyone can sort of take part in enjoying this. And he wants to use his friends to voice act to dub over it. But he only wants to do it with the female members of the cast for this Cleanup Rangers, excuse me. He only wants Paku to do a voice, he wants her to get Sarasa, someone named Sarasa, and he also wants her to get Sheila. Now, Sheila is a character we learn about through Kurapika's backstory. She is someone who was injured, found her way into Kurta territory, and was healed and given water and food and sustenance and, like I said, healed through Kurapika and Pyro's kindness. She was very grateful, and she took the leave without saying goodbye, but left a note behind, kind of thanking them for their kindness. And it was said that, I think it was 6 weeks later, she was the one who discovered the Kurta massacre. Sorry, that was 6 weeks after Kurapika's departure. So she's the one who found it. Or, according to the wiki, which I'm currently looking at just to double check myself, she is presumed to be the one who found it. So, very interesting there. Now we know what was left at the scene of the crime for the Kurta massacre. A message from the troops saying, "We will accept anything but take nothing away from us," or "Don't take anything away from us." That is something that insinuates some sort of vengeful nature to that, potentially. It doesn't seem to me, at least, like the Kurta massacre was as simple as simply getting their eyes. And this coalesces with things we said before about the little tidbits we got in chapter 392 about what Fink said. You know, was the massacre really just getting the eyes, or was there a purpose for it? This would seem to suggest some sort of purpose, and fueled by anger and despair, could there have been some sort of anger towards the clan for some reason? Could that coalesce with things we hear throughout about kidnappings? And what is Sheila's role here? Because we see her in Meteor City, my goodness, there is so much potential here, and Sheila seems to be key, so we'll see how that develops. But then Pakunoda eventually agrees and says they're gonna voice act and all this stuff, and Chrollo eventually tells her, in something that brought tears to my eyes, he says, "I love you, Paku." And she has a bit of a face and kind of just looks at him and goes, "Don't sweet talk me." And she calls him little bro prior to this, but he says, "I'm older than you," and it's just so cute, it's so adorable. And despite her calling him lil bro, I think there might have been maybe little bits of hints at tiny little cute romantic feelings towards him. I'm not sure, maybe I'm misinterpreting, but either way, they had a beautiful, beautiful little bond here, and I think it's adorable, endearing, and also very sad, because you look at this stuff, and you think of their last interactions in life. Paku sacrificed herself through her betrayal. Chrollo wanted her to allow him to die and allow the spider to live on. She was not willing to do that. She had to save him, which flew in the face and contrasted his hopes and wishes for the troop. And so we see the pain it caused him in that interaction when they exchanged hostages at the end there. At the end of episode 58, or during episode 58, don't remember the exact chapter, and that scene where they go past each other. How heartbreaking is that? In the moment, it was heartbreaking in itself. Obviously, again, not endorsing anything the troop do, but I still feel sympathy for them, and this adds so much to that moment. This was their last moment together. The history we see between them. Just being able to see it firsthand, how they reacted to one another and what their relationship was like, that makes that moment so much more heartbreaking. Pakunoda knew that Chrollo would be disappointed with her, that he might hate her for what she did, but she did it anyway because of her care for him. And what must Chrollo have felt? Betrayal, maybe. Despair at not understanding her. I don't know, it makes that moment, it makes their relationship down the line, or I guess previously, but down the line chronologically in York New, just so sad. So Sheila and Sarasa end up agreeing to dub over those voices for those roles, and we learn that Chrollo will be voicing every other character, which is interesting because it's a precursor to kind of his identity crisis and his Nen abilities, right? Because what do we know about him? He doesn't have a distinct sense of identity. Nen is based around a character's identity and sense of like how they define themselves and their personality. But Chrollo, as someone who lacks that, his Nen ability is stealing abilities from others, like a chameleon, becoming other people, embodying their Nen powers because he doesn't have an identity or purpose for himself. That is how he's defined, by himself, by his own doing. And so there is a little bit of that in his ability to play all these roles in this play, or in this series, in this dub. So, a bit of a precursor to that. He was always kind of had a bit of a yearning or a bit of a affinity to that sort of thing. Now, I think that might be all it is. I don't think that this was necessarily a direct precursor to that, because what I said about Chrollo remains. He was on the trajectory to becoming a overall pretty healthy individual, it seems like, but something changed that. There was some huge inciting incident that made Chrollo become what we know of him now. So him having this tendency or desire to play all these different roles and being good at it is a precursor to what he became, but I don't think it necessarily indicated that he was always going to become that. It's a very key distinction there. And the others, in looking at his ability to do this and just the way he talks, they wonder, how was this guy born here? I assume they're talking about his overall knowledge and the learned nature of his, and how he exposes himself and knows so many things, and all of that, how he embraces knowledge and experience in a way that's a bit different from anyone else, kind of similar to how the elders were talking about him, because I don't think there's anything else that really distinguishes himself from the rest of the kids here, apart from that. He has the same sort of energy as them. He is maybe a bit more exuberant, but not significantly so. These kids are very spirited as well, so I assume it's something like that. But then we cut to see some human traffickers who, the ones we heard about, who go to Meteor City and, for their nefarious motivations, abduct people. And we see it happening even more. And I imagine this is going to coalesce. Contextually, if we look at this in a vacuum, it may just have been some grim imagery for a transition scene or something. Or just to add some layers and immersion to the setting, something like that. But with coalescing this with the rest of, we know where Chrollo's going to go, we know there's some inciting incident that will change him, we see Nobunaga talking about despair and anger, I think this scene might be indicative of that. I think this might have some significance with regards to how things became the way they became. And then we cut back to the kids dubbing Sarasa, Sheila, Chrollo and Paku, untainted by darkness, innocence and optimism and joy. And so the potential here is immense. This flashback could shift things. You know, we know we're gonna have at least one more chapter here. I hope we have like 4 or 5. I want to soak myself in this backstory as much as possible. I want to know so much because it could go in so many different directions. Could it inform us about the Kurta massacre? I would be surprised if it didn't at this point because of Sheila's presence and because just it seems like a no-brainer. So we're gonna learn more about Kurapika potentially? I would love that. Will it go even further? Will there be skips as we see what happens to Chrollo, as we see Nobunaga come into the fold, maybe other members as well? There's no Kortepi, there's no Benolanov, so we could see some more of that. Could it even go far enough to show some Silva stuff? We know that Silva fought Chrollo one day. Could it show us the sort of precursor to the scene we've gotten in chapters, I believe it was 102 or 105. I might be getting the chapters mixed up, but that Pakunoda flashes back to when she thinks in York New about Chrollo talking to the spider and their overall philosophy. Because in that scene, something that that was pointed out to me by Twitter user @GyroHunterHunter, HXH, is that some of the troop members, in response to Chrollo being so dead set on this goal and this identity and what they need to do, and embodying this new philosophy and being so cold and detached, in response to this, we see Phantom Troop members being surprised, like, is this really Chrollo, is what is said, quite literally. So it seems that something recent incited him to become this way, or maybe he was missing for a while, or something like that. So will it cover up to that point? Does it have to do with the Elders? Does it have to do with the kidnappings or abductions? Could we eventually go to Gyro stuff? Like, all the way forward? That's a bit of a reach, but hey, you know, we're here. Could we see other characters? Kanadi's from Meteor City, you know. Could we see some other Zoldyck roots there? There's a few. So there's so much potential here, and oh man. And I speak a lot about potential when it comes to this arc, because it's true, there is so much potential that could be carried out here. But I do want to stress that this chapter, in and of itself, as it is, changes so many things and was one of my favorites of the entire Succession War arc. I do need to clarify that because it was amazing. And as much as I talk about potential, the greatness is right in front of our eyes already. And it was pointed out to me in my chat when I was reading through this on Twitch, something that I agree with, which is that innocence seems to be a primary theme of the Succession War. Gaining innocence, or regaining innocence, losing innocence, holding on to innocence. We have Prince Wobble and Kurapika, and will he drift more towards his true self through protecting Prince Wobble and his innocence? I think I define Kurapika's true self as this person who loves others and wants to maintain that, and that could be a form of regaining his innocence in a way. You know, he's forever changed by the things he's done, but could he drift back to that? And then we have Seri, who seems to be drifting towards or continuing on his path through what we heard in chapter 394. By the way, sorry I wasn't able to do a video for chapter 394. Like I've said, these are kind of dependent on my schedules for that weekend and week, and if I just don't have the time, I unfortunately can't do it. But I was able to do this one. Hopefully I'll be able to do more. Sorry for that digression. But yeah, in terms of innocence, Seri losing his innocence from potentially a very young age, and his friends seeming to lament that. And then the troop and their backstory and how they lose their innocence, potentially through what we're about to see. It could be very sad what we're about to see. Man, I'm very scared, but I need the next chapter today, yesterday. Now, giving this extensive backstory could lead you to think that this is a death flag for the members, and I could agree to an extent, but something that was clear to me before is that this could be the last hurrah for the Spiders. They could just go down in blazes on the ship in this arc. I've always felt like this could be the end of the Spider, this arc, or at least most of them. Maybe not Machi, maybe not Kaluto or Illumi, and I would guess not Chrollo, because Hisoka and what he wants to do with the troop, I think it'll result in Chrollo being the last alive, or very close to it. So yes, I think this could be a death flag for the Spider, but I think there were death flags before, or it's just a feeling I got at least. But this brings up hypotheticals, you know, what if after we see this backstory and we see how Chrollo became the way he became, and we already know he had an identity here, or the semblance of an identity already as a kid, through, I think, his passion and compassion. You know, he had a passion for learning all these sorts of things, but the thing that sticks out to me the most is, I love you, Paku. So Could his distinguishing characteristic have been his care for others, and some inciting incident caused him to lose all semblance of his perceived self-identity? Could he regain it right at the end? And could the inciting incident for that be the death of the Spider, as fire and blood surrounds him, as all the members he loves go down in front of him, and he realizes right at the end, all this time, my identity was in my care for these people. And now he realizes it now that he's lost them. That was who he was from the beginning, that was who he is at the end. It's just a hypothetical, but something to that extent, resulting in his compassion and connection with others, or maybe just realizing what it may be at the end, even if it has nothing to do with that, through the complete destruction of the Spider. I think he has to be the last one standing. I think he really does. At least of the members who are distinctly attached to him, outside of Kaluto and Illumi. And in that way, Hisoka could be the true bringer of complete death, and yet the bringer of identity at the same time. Chrollo's conclusion could be phenomenal, and this chapter just elevates him so much. Chrollo has so much, he is an amazing character. You guys know how I feel about him. He could potentially be the best character in this story if things are played well, as I believe Togashi could do. I cannot wait to learn more about this. Oh man. And the flashback is going to continue. Lots of people have been talking about the trees we see in chapter 397. It could potentially be a part of this flashback too, we'll see. Either way, I cannot wait for next week. I hope you guys enjoyed the chapter. I hope you guys enjoyed my ramblings. Please let me know your thoughts. There is so much to talk about in this. So yeah, please do. And I'll see you guys next time. Many thanks for watching.